Until this point, all we've done is we've designed our layout and we have given the fields names. Now we're going to initialize those fields in the code itself. It's important to do these so we can add handlers to the code so we can handle the responses. So if there's an input coming in, we want to be able to do something with it. That's what we're doing here. We're going to declare and initialize the fields and store the input and output variables in variables so that we can actually modify those variables when we need to. Welcome back. In this part we're going to actually do some coding. Now we're going to create some handlers that will handle inputs and button presses and anything else from whatever we have laid out here, and we can actually do something with. So if it's an input, it will process the input and save it in a variable. Now let's take a look at main.axml. Up at the top here. Again, we have two inputs, the button and the final output, each with a unique ID, which we will use in a little bit here. So keep that in mind. We'll go back to mainActivity.cs where the actual coding will take place, and we are going to do a few things here. So after, in fact, let's put it right here. So let me explain what's going on. So we have a couple of classes here. This is the class main activities. This is where basically the main activity is going to take place, so it's aptly named. Now inside of this method, which is the onCreate, this is going to be where basically all of the main calls to any kind of function are going to be when the app first starts running. So this base onCreate and the set content view we're just going to ignore for now. Not going to worry about them, we're going to leave them there. So this basically just kind of sets up the view and sets up the app to be run. So underneath this we're going to add some fields. Now actually let's make them global. So what we're going to do is declare our variables from here. So each one of these fields will become a variable with this name. So we'll go to main activity again and we'll just start. So our first one will be an edit text. So this is the type that this is, and we'll call this cost text. Our next one is again an edit text, and we're going to call this tip text. And then we have a button, and I'll explain exactly what is going on in just a minute. So we have our button, and we'll call this calculate button. And finally we have a view text, or a text view, and we're going to call this final cost, total cost text. So right now I'm just declaring some variables, haven't initialized them yet. I'll do that in just a minute. So the cost text and the tip text, if we go to main, are going to be these two. So this is going to be the cost text here and the tip text in there. And these are both of type edit text because it's text that can be edited directly by the user when using the app. Now we have our button, which we're calling calculate button, and that's this button here. And last but not least, we have a text view called total cost text, and that is this one here. So when working with Android, you have to declare and initialize, which I'll do in just a second, each of these widgets that you've added. So now we've declared them up here, let's initialize them. So we have cost text. So we're going to say cost text equals, and what we're going to do is find view by ID. So notice how when I went to type it in there, it gives me a list of options, and we're going to select find view by ID, and we're going to open these angled brackets here, and we're going to put in our ID, which is it's of type edit text. Alright, And now what we're going to do, I'm just going to set up the brackets there. What we do is we call resource ID, and what fields do we have? Well, we have right here, it gives us a few options. This one is going to be the cost, because this is our cost text, and this is the ID we're going to use. So where have we seen this before, this txt cost? Well, if we go back to main and we go to our cost field, then we get our ID text cost. And that's going to be the same for all four of these different fields. You have to call them by the specific ID. So this is saying find this object. It's an edit text type object, and we're going to find this resource by its ID, which is text cost. So that's what's going on in this line. This is basically assigning any kind of input from here, and it's going to store it in the variable called cost text. So at the end, when we actually run our app and use it, we enter it in a cost, and it's going to get stored in this cost text. Now let's do the same for tip. So this one is called tip text, and we're going to do exactly the same, find view by ID there. So once you type in find, then it's the only option that comes up. Again, the braces, it's also of type edit text. So we're going to let that complete. And brackets again. And just like before, we're going to find this resource by the ID. And it is, if we go back to main, just to double check, its ID is txt tip. So we're going to type in txt tip, and there it comes up. Alright, so two more to go. We have a button, so this is calculate button, and also find view by ID. And this, in this case, it's of type button. And again, resource ID, and this is going to be button btn calculate, because that's the ID we gave it in main. If we go over to main, click on the button, you can double check there, btn calculate, and these have to match. If they don't match, then they turn red. For example, here we have resource ID my button. This was here by default. I didn't actually code this. And notice how it's in red, because my button doesn't exist. That variable no longer exists, and that's why it's in red, because it's an error. In fact, let's get rid of this, because we no longer have anything to do with that button. This next line, the next couple of lines, I'll explain in a little bit here. We just want to finish setting everything up. So our final one is going to be total cost text. And again, we'll do find view by ID. And this one is of type text view instead of edit text. And once again, resource ID. And this one is going to be the total cost. So now we've set up our four fields to be handled by the code if necessary. So we have our cost being the input from that first bar. We have our tip being the second input. The calculate button is going to be btn calculate, and the total cost will be that very last text box that we have at the bottom there. In this part, we initialize the fields that we added to our layout. So we store the input or output of each field into a variable to manipulate and use later. This means that we took whatever will be in the specific fields, which will be our two input fields and our button and our output field. We've taken all of that, we've stored them in variables so that we can call on them and manipulate them and do what we need to with them later. So by now you should be able to declare and initialize these fields and any other fields that you might add to a layout so that you can handle them in the code.